immediately go on with the first keynote, Rym Ayadi of the MEDPRO, the Mediterranean Prospect Project. She will give a talk about a foresight perspective on the Med region. Rym, thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much for inviting me to share with you some of the analysis that we have developed within the MEDPRO project, which stands for Mediterranean Prospects. Now, the main objective of this project, which was implemented from 2010 to 2013, was to develop new scenarios for sustainable development for the Euro-Mediterranean up to Horizon 2030. So basically, the main objective was to have an integrated approach which articulates in an organized fashion the political and socio-economic drivers while looking very carefully at the long-term challenges and basically on resources, energy and water within the climate change stresses in the region. Just to make sure. Okay, here you go. Now, the MEDPRO has provided very good analysis on how, what would be the future of the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation. And as I said previously, it is very important to have a more integrated political and socio-economic approach for scientific research to explore the drivers of sustainable and inclusive growth and development in the region, to devise long-term sustainable policies. And these policies will have to take into account all these drivers and try to act upon them. Now, what we have tried to do within this project is also to build on the socioeconomic complementarities and synergies between different regions surrounding the Mediterranean, and trying to look at all the sectors of the of the economy while looking at these long-term challenges, including the population challenges, the water challenges, the energy, and also, as you well understand, the security and political challenges where this region has been living over the last 4 or 5 years since the Arab revolts. So what we try to do really is to integrate all this in not only a quantitative, say, modeling fashion, but also in a qualitative fashion. And we try to have expert judgment in the region to allow us really to bring value into the policy recommendations that we have developed. Now, as I said also, is we took well account of the resources constraint, energy and water, and long-term challenges, including the climate change, as the Mediterranean is very well known, subject to climate change pressures, especially for the years to come. Now, what we also have done is scenario analysis. Now, the scenario analysis should not be looked at as a projections that will tell you what this region would look like in the years to come in Horizon 2030, but rather to see if there are some assumptions that are being put in place, how this region would look like, and what would be the policy actions that should be put together to allow this region to move into a sustainable, socioeconomic sustainable path. So the relevance of this scenario analysis is a strategic and policy tool to drive future development in the region and with other regions. We have focused on the Euro-Mediterranean, but we could also look at other regions, like, for example, what would be the role of the Gulf in the region, as normally the whole enlarged region, in fact, they have the same pressures, and they could put together some efforts to move within a path of sustainable development. Now, applied research is key to drive the change toward inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic development. And I think this is what drove the team over 4 years to devise what are, first of all, the drivers for socioeconomic, for inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic development, but also to give some recommendations, policy recommendations to not only the local policy makers, but also to the European policy makers to enhance and strengthen the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation towards a more, I would say, more sustainable future. Now, what I would like to do today is to give you some results on the water analysis that we have done, but also to link this within the overall framework of MEDPRO. So all the information on MEDPRO, all the publications, all the data is publicly available on the Mediterranean MEDPRO-foresight.eu. You will find all the data available. It means that anything can be replicated, all the research on water, on environment, on energy, the link between the different parameters, all the different drivers can be replicated to allow also other researchers to update the work that has been done. But also all the team of MEDPRO has developed the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association. We are trying currently to do more work on the same to ensure that the recommendations that we have provided are being taken forward. Now, the scenario framework, it's simply based on what I call two axes. The sustainability increase of total EU med wealth, which is based on different capital endowments within the economy, including the economic, social, and other type of capital endowments, while taking into consideration the resources, energy, environment, energy, water, and climate change. We also try to look at all the possibilities of interaction between the different regions through trade, through investments, and also through migration, human capital within the different regions. And then what we have looked at is the region, the Mediterranean. We took 11 countries from Morocco to Israel, and then we tried to see the relationships that these countries have had over the last, say, 3 decades of partnership, not only economic partnership, but also science partnership and other types of partnership and financial partnership. And then what we try to develop is a model that is based on complementarities. Complementarities, it means if the same region, the Euro-Mediterranean region, is sharing some long-term challenges like water or energy, what can be done, win-win situation to allow the region to develop together. And obviously, this project is quite restrictive because in the fact that we are looking at Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, again, we could think at all different types of cooperation that could be applicable as well within this framework. Now, the different forms of cooperation is more collaboration, more integration, or less, depending on the geopolitical factors that are underpinning within this model. And as you know very well, up to 2010, before the Arab revolts, there has been what we call a business as usual scenario, a reference scenario that has been there up to 2010, whereby the relationships between the EU and the Mediterranean countries have been based on intergovernmental relationship. Europe has been very key within the development model of these countries, but still it's all based on bilateral agreements among the different member states and also the Mediterranean countries, and EU has been quite important, but realistically there hasn't been a multilateral type of agreements within that region. So sometimes you will see countries that have different projects or different initiatives that can be duplicated and eventually this is not really a clear vision for the region. Now, what we have tried to do is to think what would drive the sustainability within the Euro-Mediterranean region, whereby the Euromed becomes a union over the 20 years to come, and what it means in terms, for example, of trade, research and development, science and technology, migration, trade, energy, and water. So it means if there is a water stress within the Euro-Mediterranean region, there is a mega project where all the Euro-Mediterranean region could contribute with no differences between the countries. Now, another way of looking at it is co-development, whereby the Mediterranean is organized into sub-region, and 2-3 countries, they collaborate together to develop certain view, certain vision, and then together they go to the EU and develop other alliances and so on. And this is also part of what we have developed, the ideas that we have developed with the South Mediterranean countries. And they said, why not? That's also a possible development based on a new development model. Now, the Euro-Mediterranean area under threat, which is the deterioration of the business as usual scenario, which is not a reality anymore because of the shocks, the political shocks that have occurred in the region. And clearly we see that there are some weakening of some relationship that Europe had before with countries like Syria or others, or Libya, whereby because of these current geopolitical stresses, there is some what we call the red prospects or the red transition, where the whole region is kind of under threat. So these are the framework. This is the framework of the MEDPRO, which has been applied to energy, to water, and to trade, to population development, and so on, to allow to see whether the business as usual scenario has been or not sustainable. And you will see clearly that it is not. And clear policy action has to be pursued, and it hasn't been the case. So we are, it looks like I am 2 years ago, where I said there was a momentum 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the Arab Spring or Arab revolts started. But up to now, we don't see really this vision and this development for the region. So this is actually, I would say, call it as academics call. It can be archived perhaps in the libraries. Now, in terms of the water development, now what we have tried to do here, as you see, looking at these scenarios, as I said, the 4 scenarios, which is the business as usual scenario, sustainable, the sustainable scenario, which are the integration and kind of fragmented cooperation, what I call the co-development, and the Euro-Mediterranean decline or under threat. And if you see here, the business as usual scenario in terms of the water withdrawal projection in 2030, the situation is not sustainable unless we see that within the scenarios of integration and fragmented cooperation, there is a less stress on water resources than what the business as usual scenario is providing us. Now, in terms of the decline, or what I call Euromed under threat, the same. So they are kind of equated in terms of the business as usual and the Euromed under threat in terms of the water stress and water withdrawals in Horizon 2030. So the situation today, it's not sustainable, and really policy actions need to be put in place to allow this development to change. As you see here, within this chart in front, and it has been done by our colleagues who have been leading the work on water and climate change and environment. In the business as usual scenario, there are big stresses on water again, and it's very similar to the unsustainable and failed cooperation, which is the Mediterranean under threat. But then for the sustainable and enhanced cooperation, which it means that clear assumptions and clear policy actions will have to be put in place, then eventually the water stress will be dealt with. Now, obviously, if we look at the business as usual scenario in countries like Morocco, the cost of adaptation to respond to the water stress is quite large, and it means a lot of investment to move toward a more sustainable future on water adaptation. The same for Jordan, and this means large investments in terms of, for example, desalination of water, and this involves other stakeholders which will need to really believe on this type of projects. But obviously, first and foremost, there is a need to have the awareness that this type of investments will have to be done, and they will have to be done today, maybe yesterday, to allow to respond to this type of stresses. Is it done? This is something that I am not very much sure. Now, obviously, the water goes beyond the water challenges and stresses, and it has implications on the cropping patterns, impact on farm income. And as you see here, for the business as usual scenario, there is an unmet demand on water needs, and this has to be looked at very seriously by the policymakers. This is only the case for Morocco, but we have done, I mean, the project MEDPRO could be expanded to other to other countries to see what are really the impacts of water stresses on cropping patterns, farm income, and so on, especially in countries which are very highly agriculture driven, and if also this has implication on the trade patterns, because today within the whole debate about opening and liberalization of the agriculture sector, there are some serious vulnerabilities that need to be taken into consideration in terms of the negotiation of liberalization, because at the end of the day, many countries which are living into stress of water stress in the future, they will be exporting water which will be extremely expensive, and this will have serious implications on their development model in the future. So these are some analyses which even from a future of cooperation between Europe and the Mediterranean will have to be very seriously taken into consideration. We have done the same also for energy and for other for climate change. Obviously, the situation gets even worsened if you have more challenging scenarios of climate change. And these all have to be put or incorporated within this type of long-term analysis. Now, what we have proposed, and this is the team who did the work on water and climate change here, is to have a roadmap for sustainable water use in the South and East Mediterranean countries. Sustainable development future path requires an integrated vision and a combination of technical, economic, social, and institutional factors, fostering structural change, which is very important to enact sound and efficient policies for this. Now, obviously, we have to link this to the increase of population and the local policies within this, because obviously this has implications on the use of water and also on the food policy over time. Now, the policies will have to have a dual supply and demand vision. A well-adjusted implementation of water supply enhancing and demand management is very, very important to put these measures in place and improve the governance. Improving the governance is also key to attain a cost-effective, sustainable future and balance the trade-offs between socioeconomic development and water resources conservation. Obviously, again, a long-term approach is key to ensure that this is being done. But obviously you need to have all the stakeholders involved and all the policy makers involved within a regional approach rather than a one-to-one approach. Because one-to-one country approach is not enough, because water is it's a common good for the whole region, and it needs to be looked at from a different perspective. Improving water management efficiency is key, and then it is important to also consider that the water demand policies, sometimes they are on-site specific, and there are some specific economic instruments that are linked to it, but they obviously have to be carefully designed not to affect negatively the farm income. So there are some trade-offs that need to be taken care of. Now, the roadmap for the sustainable water use in the South and East Mediterranean countries is, number one, reconsidering the water supply and by developing additional sources, desalination and rainwater harvesting, like for example in cases for Jordan and Israel, and reuse of treated waste water. Obviously, this means more research and trying to bring the cost of this type of measures down. And the role of the donors and the financial market is key for this, to understand really the importance of reconsidering the water supply. Now, the water demand, it's important, obviously, to install efficient irrigation technologies, develop new technologies, more research and development on this, and shifting to a more water-saving cropping patterns and agendas. And this, obviously, is not easy. It's easier said than done, especially if countries have already embarked in some specific patterns of production. And it's not easy to change it in one day, but this is a long-term approach, and it needs to be looked at to at least respond to this type of challenges. Now, the third point is improving institutional management, better coordination, of course, of policies and government entities. This has been done in many countries, like, for example, Turkey and other Jordan. Development of information system. Information is key. Everybody has to be aware of the importance of water. It's a horizontal issue that doesn't touch only one aspect, but it touches the whole socioeconomic fabric. And also is to use of economic instruments, like, for example, tax instrument or other type of regulatory instrument to allow more improvement of this institutional management. And again, this is key, the research and development program to improve irrigation farming activities, and obviously stakeholder involvement. And as I said previously, is to also to integrate the impact of climate change. So this is really how we have treated the water point, and obviously to try to foster sustainable water use in the region. Going beyond now the water, and what we have tried to do is to link not only water aspects, but also economic and other financial aspects like trade, investment infrastructure, and use of energy, specific patterns of use of energy, specific use of patterns of water, and we have integrated this within what we call GEM E3 model that integrates environment, economic aspects, and energy and water. We have a water component on this. Putting this in a format of a model will allow you to see what would be if you continue developing your economic activity to certain level, what would be the implication on economic growth and on GDP as a whole. And clearly here, if everything has continued up to 2010 without really external shocks, we could see that still the region would have increased by an average of 2 to 3%, But this doesn't mean anything because this growth is not sustainable because it still uses unsustainably the resources of the scarce resources in the region. And then the pattern, it's what we have known since 3 decades. Now, if there is no policy action, and obviously we know, because there has been the Arab revolts in 2010, and there has been a deterioration in terms of political aspects, and then the risk premium in the region has increased, we could see clearly that simply changing this, there is a clear deterioration from the business as usual scenario, because over time, the investment will decrease, the private consumption will decrease, the export and import will decrease, the employment will increase, and then obviously the real wages will decrease. So if nothing changes and the whole region continues within the stresses, political stresses and challenges, then there is a clear deterioration and loss of value, economic value from 2015 to 2030. And looking at the cases, for example, of Libya, Syria, and others, we can clearly see that this type of scenarios are happening. Now, a sustainable Euro-Mediterranean policy agenda means there are some policies, a vision that has to be taken on board, not only by the north, by Europe, but also by the South Mediterranean countries, put their efforts together all together. Then we can see some additional cumulative investment, because as you know, money only goes whenever there is stability, and there are some programs to be developed. And clearly we see, if we look at the sustainable scenario, there is an increase of value which is quite substantial from 2015 to 2030, where it's broken down in infrastructure development, the labor and more trade and so on. And this is key to know. I mean, the numbers, I would always say the numbers should not be looked at in absolute terms, but rather in relative terms. So it means that there is an increase vis-à-vis the business as usual scenario, which is substantial. There is a huge potential to further development. We have also provided a comprehensive long-term Euro-Mediterranean policy agenda that not only looks at the political drivers, but also socioeconomic drivers, water, climate change, energy, and so on. And this was presented 2 years ago, 1 year ago, but up to now we don't see that there is this vision, there is this common view for the Mediterranean to move it toward a long-term sustainable future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rym, for the very comprehensive, I think, lecture, and also for keeping the time so tightly. So this is really valuable. I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any comment or question. I think that, I mean, just to break the ice. I think that your talk, I mean, just show how we need really to take actions, and action to adapt, to mitigate, and to take policy which will take care of the use of water, and how we can increase the water use efficiency and the efficiency of use and reuse of other kind of source. Please, Cristina.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment which gives me also the possibility to say a few words before leaving. The presentation was very interesting, and I, of course, hear the call that something has to be done more with these countries by the EU and by those countries as well. But there is something that I would like to place in this discussion, that I think it's not correct to say that nothing has been done. Because, first of all, there is a project in which you are working, which we are financing on these issues. And also, what I would like to say, and I don't say it in a defensive way, but looking forward, is that we have the political instruments. We have adopted a communication in the EU, which is not an understatement. The communication, it's an official Commission and EU policy document in which we say that we want to strengthen our strategic cooperation in research and innovation with third countries and regions. But more than that, we have adopted Horizon 2020, which is a 7-year program with 80 billion euros, which is completely open to cooperation with third countries. And in Horizon 2020, and I have here a colleague from the directorate in charge of climate change and water, there is a big envelope on the societal challenges related to climate change and water. And so there is the possibility to really address these issues in this framework. We have the program, it's open to participation of Mediterranean countries. We have challenges which define and tackle this kind of issues. So I think that the question, and also this is important to be here today to discuss, it is certainly to say, yes, something more has to be done, but also I would like that we get more concrete in saying how can we fully tap the possibility that exists, because there are possibilities. There is a huge possibility. We have the biggest multilateral research program in the world. I mean, I don't know if this is clear. So there is the possibility, and what I would like to avoid is that we just discuss on the fact that something has to be done more, but we need also to focus on how better, again, use the instruments that are available. So I would really like that you keep this in mind, because I think that, in the first calls of Horizon 2020, something more could have emerged in terms of cooperation with the Mediterranean countries. And we in the European Commission are doing as much as possible to promote awareness in the Mediterranean countries, in the member states, and about this instrument. But we really need that there is an active involvement of everybody, and I really hope that this discussion will contribute to that. With these words, I will leave you, and I thank you again for this fruitful and interesting discussion.
Thank you, Cristina. Just before you leave, just a comment. I think that I want to thank Cristina for a presence here for so long time, and also for this comment, because this open up to one of the main objective of this conference, actually. As she said, I mean, we have an instrument, we have a big program like Horizon 2020. One of the really important outcome of this conference would be to get a more organized cooperation between the scientific community and the stakeholder community of the European and non-European countries to take part to this framework program more actively and in a more coordinated way. I think that this conference offers the possibility to put together many already bilateral or single cooperation between European scientists and non-European southern Mediterranean countries in a more coordinated way, so that we pave the way, I mean, to build up a real network of cooperation. And this is, I think, one of the main things that we expect, I mean, to come out of the conference. So thank you very much, Cristina.
Thank you.
So at this point, I give the floor to Alberto Basset, and for the second keynote, the keynote will be Managing Interface, Biodiversity and Ecosystem in Changing Mediterranean.
It's okay.
Ah, sì. Oh, sorry, Rym, please. C'era un'altra domanda?
I thought there was a question, but anyway, just wanted to re-emphasize what you have said about cooperation. What has been done already in research and development, science and technology in general within the research area program, it's quite important, but we also need to look at the weaknesses within the South Mediterranean countries, whether they can really use and be able to benefit as much as possible at a maximum level whether they have a need for it. And I think an assessment of what are the capacities in the South Mediterranean countries is needed to have this type of assessment, to see how they can benefit at maximum within this type of instrument. Another point which I would like to make is the involvement of other type of stakeholders, even within the European Union, like, for example, DEFCO or other types of institution, whereby they provide instruments or financial instrument or technical assistance that need to go hand in hand with also the research type of activities and instruments. And I think this is quite important. Beyond this, I think the private sector have to be involved as well to be able to transmit or transfer this type of innovations and so on into the ground. And so far, obviously, there is a lot that needs to be done. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that we have to build up this environment, I mean, where the cooperation between the science, stakeholder, private sector, and so on, I mean, will build up, actually. And so this is very, very important. Thank you very much for your contribution to this.